you think about it, within the last 5 years, the workplace has changed drastically. So remote and hybrid models are increasingly common, together with the challenges of fostering a strong sense of community among employees. There is a bunch of studies that found that employees who feel connected to their colleagues report higher levels of job satisfaction, engagement, and productivity. And even they say that these studies say that a strong employees community can significantly reduce turnover rates, a significant cost concern for a lot of business. But building a thriving community isn't just about virtual coffees and team outings. It is about creating a space where genuine human connection flourishes, and that's where technology comes in, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a wrong way. This episode of Growth Hacking Culture podcast will dive into the power of tech and human connection in building thriving employee communities. Many of us want to explore, including me, how technology can be used to bridge these physical distances, facilitate communication, and foster collaboration, all while keeping the human element at the forefront. And my guest today is someone who knows about technology and who knows about human connection. So today I have Heather Cook, who is my guest. She is the lead of Global Community at Microsoft 365. So she has been working at Microsoft, and you can find her quite often also doing speaking engagements through her company, Creative Maven, and she talks a lot about experiences, a lot about human connection. And Heather, I'm so glad that we have the time to this 1 hour to spend together. Thank you very much for making the time, Heather.
Thank you, Ivan. What a wonderful introduction and a great topic. And it's so lovely to be on your wonderful podcast. You have so many wonderful, good nuggets and wonderful people on. I am so honored to be on your show with you. Thank you so much. This is great.
By the way, I started this podcast because I wanted to learn from other people. Because to tell you the truth, it's not like I love to having my face for all of the world. I just wanted to learn, and I say, so if I had to spend time learning from others, how the hell do I do it? And that's how Growth Hacking Culture podcast started. And sometimes it could be really great in terms of the type of people that I meet and in terms of the knowledge. Listen, I wanted to dive into that topic with a questions. So according to you, what are the key challenges companies faced in fostering this strong sense of community among employees, especially in today's hybrid or remote work environments? What are these challenges, Heather?
Well, I mean, just the hybridness of our work these days is one thing for sure. And I feel like, we all survived something, and many of us survived this pandemic, and we lost a lot of people. This is this huge moment, right? Nobody's ever gone through this before. So we're all still trying to suss out how to be together, how to reconnect, how to talk with each other. And so I feel like, in the workplace today, you said we've got people all over the place connecting, through all kinds of different means and ways. And it's hard, it's hard to take a moment to really connect with people because you have your job, you have your charter, you know what you're supposed to be doing. And so a lot of people just make sure and do their jobs, and maybe don't take the time to connect or ask a question just as simple as how was your weekend? That kind of thing. And so I think, with our scrolling culture as well of social media, where our attention spans have gotten a little shorter, it's like we're very apt to sit on our phones and be by ourselves and not make those connections. So I think that, employers today do have a lot of challenges in trying to figure out ways to bring people together, to suggest things, meeting in a water cooler style. Something one of my teams has done for a long time is we have an hour or two a week that's just kind of open, where we open up Microsoft Teams and we pop in and we just hang out and we work. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we don't, but we're there together. And that's just one small example of something that you can put on the calendar and bring your team together, because you end up, it's kind of like you're at study hall back in school, where you'd study for a little bit and then you chit chat for a minute and you'd talk about somebody walking by or whatever, it's kind of like that. But those are, definitely some small thing to get people together. And then on a larger level, I think it's important for businesses to have consistency in message, in that you have an all hands meeting, or a larger meeting where you have your leadership talking about what's going on, sharing maybe even a newsletter once a week, or one of our leaders, he shares his Friday thoughts every Friday. People love consistency in a world where things are very, inconsistent and random. I think we really do like some order, and knowing that that one thing's going to come out, or those few things are dependable and that you can count on, I think is really important to people.
I love kind of this definition that you have given about connecting. So it's not anymore transactional. I'm going to deliver what I'm doing to you, and you're going to deliver what you are doing. No, it's about catching up at the personal level.
Yep.
But despite that, that's an ideal scenario. I have the impression that there is still some companies who might use technology or the way of catching up remotely just for work. And that's not good, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah. I do think so. I mean, we have all of this beautiful technology. I mean, even, if you're going into the Wayback Machine, starting with, just the internet itself, but like MySpace and Facebook and all of these things, there's all of these, wonderful pieces of technology now, that what we're on to do our video call and Microsoft Teams, and, all of these ways that we can connect with each other. And I think, Microsoft also has a whole, employee experience suite called Microsoft Viva, that was a conglomeration of a bunch of different products that are now in one suite to help with all kinds of things across the employee experience. And, I think it's really employers, from either their HR departments or their marketing departments, internal marketing and connectivity is just as important as external. There's all kinds of studies that show, productivity comes from people feeling like they belong to something greater than themselves, right? And that they're connected, and that their employer cares about them, gives them opportunities to get training, to connect with each other, to listen to cool, inspiring things, to be a part of, maybe even just a morale event or something fun where we did during the pandemic, we did trivia games together, once a week, where it was just where we got together and did something fun and silly just to learn a little bit about each other. So, I think that if companies aren't taking advantage of those things, they're really doing a disservice to themselves, their productivity, and frankly, their bottom line. Yeah.
Tell me, I mean, I'm a little bit curious. I wasn't planning to ask you so much about what is behind all the tools of Microsoft, but I wanted to understand, is there a way, for instance, to know if Teams is overused on just work? Now with the rise of AI, is it possible to detect that if people feel like belonging to the group, to recognize, and so that we have some flags, some triggers to say, hey guys, it's not good?
Yeah, absolutely. As far as, as far as Microsoft 365 is concerned, depending on what kind of license you have, E5 or E3 for your business, there's Microsoft Viva. Much of the functionality in that actually comes with a license, and then there's an extra premium license that you can get for other stuff. So there is an application that's called Viva Insights, and it's all data driven. It's actionable insights about productivity and performance. So it is looking at how much time people are spending. Do you have focus time set up? How much time are they on their computers? What are they opening emails? All those sorts of things. So there's all kinds of ways to look at that and actually then be able to action it. Viva also has Viva Amplify, which is a way to send communications out, internal communications, to Teams, to SharePoint, to Outlook, with one pane of content that goes out many places. You've got Viva Engage, which is a internal community application. It was Yammer. People know that word, Yammer.
Yammer.
So Yeah. So it's been rebranded, and it's Viva Engage. So yeah, so there's all kinds of, things that you can do to really look at, how your employees are engaging with each other. Are they, are their calendars just jam-packed full of meetings, all of that sort of thing. So there are insights that you can take, and then you can talk about it, as a team, or you can talk about it as a company. There's also ways to do employee surveys, like we call them signals at Microsoft. So we do that once a year, where we go in and it's employee signals and then manager signals. We use Viva to do that ourselves. So there's a way to put out like short little surveys to check in on people, and then that larger surveys. And one of the things that's really important is getting that information and then actually talking about it. Like a lot of people will take in that information and then they don't want to share it. Well, I mean, the whole purpose of that, it's not you're bad, you're doing wrong things. It's hey, let's actually look at what's happening and talk about it and figure out how we can bring some change, or make some different decisions potentially about how we work, and how we do things. So yeah, so those are available to folks who are already using Microsoft 365. So
That's
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
I want to be a little bit provocative. And I
Okay.
warned you before the recording that
Sure.
sometimes I do throw things out there. Tell me, do really employees need to have this sense of community at work? Or is it something nice to have, and it's better that employees have this sense of community or belonging outside work, with their families, with their friends?
Sure.
Do we need to be friends with our peers? That's
Sure.
that's a
Yeah. I mean, I think my initial impulse to answer your question with a yes or no is yes. I do think that having a sense of belonging and community and friendship at work is important. I think that, you know, we spend part of our lives at work, at home, and then we sleep, right? It's like a third, if not more of our lives. And so to be around people that are joyful and inspiring and share and are out willing to help us and to listen is just so important. And you don't get to choose that. You go into a job and then you meet your team and you're like, okay, who are all these people and what are they like, and all of that stuff. I do believe as a manager that you need to have a bit of a, not a wall, but you definitely, I think as a manager, it's good to have a little bit of a separation, because that relationship is important to have be businesslike and professional and all of that. But I say that, and I'm really close friends with so many of my managers and people in my life too. So I've always tended personally to blend those things, because that's just who I am, and that's how I've been a part of my professional life. I haven't been friends with every manager I've had, and I haven't been friends with every direct report I've had either. But I think there's a difference maybe between that friendship and being friendly, right? I think that that's really important. And I do feel like the teams that I see or that I have been involved in that are connected, that maybe do things outside of work, or that at least talk to each other about their lives, even in that one meeting a week that might even be 30 minutes, or everybody shares kind of, if not what they did over the weekend. I think that's hugely important. We humans, we want to belong to something greater than ourselves, always. And I believe that personally, that like one of the best things we can do in our lives is develop deep relationships with other people. I feel, I count myself lucky and blessed, and that I've been in and around Microsoft now for about 23, 24 years. I started much, when I was very young, and I've worn all the hats. I've been a vendor consultant. I've been full-time now. This is my 4-year anniversary this week back at Microsoft as a full-time employee. I've been a partner, I'm a customer. I've been an event producer. I mean, I've literally worn every hat you can imagine, and I've seen so many changes in 25 almost plus years of how we all relate to each other. And I will tell you that some of my best friends in the entire world that are on that top grid in my iPhone, are from work. are people that I met at work that are now my dear friends and mentors. And, I have friends from college, and I did theater in school, and I had a theater company, and I do some entertainment stuff as well. But definitely, Microsoft has afforded me being a part of a community that's just so wonderful, sharing and fun, and, like teaching each other and not making people feel dumb either, like everybody's welcome. And that's what I loved about it. But I do think it's important to have that camaraderie, friendliness, the support of each other at work. It just makes 100% difference, I think,
I think as humans, we all aspire to have at least the choice. So we can decide, as you say, you
Yeah,
cannot be friends with all your bosses, but some of them, yes, at least you have the
sure.
choices. And
Yeah.
if the workplace, the environment, the culture allows that that is
Yep.
easy to choose, then it's good. A
Yeah.
little bit like this story with remote working. It shouldn't be like everybody should be remote or everybody should be in the office. It's
Right.
sometimes people wants to have
Yep.
just a choice because
Yeah.
that's our freedom. That's what makes us
Yeah.
human to have a possibility, an option where we can take
Absolutely.
decisions. I
Yeah.
love.
Yeah.
And by the way, you made me think that back in the days when I went through different assessments about the culture of Microsoft, and I must
Hmm.
say that for a tech company, it
Hmm.
has pulled it out quite well. It
Yeah.
do not bitch about the culture. There has been a little bit of dots here and there, but
Sure.
overall, I find it that yeah, people are engaged. They feel okay and working for
Mhm.
Microsoft.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, all companies have their ebbs and flows, and, it does definitely depends on leadership and, sign of the times and all of that. But yeah, I do think that, I wouldn't have stayed working in and around the company if I, didn't like it, So, but yeah, no, I feel like there's, Satya Nadella, our CEO, he wrote that book, Hit Refresh, and I think he's been a really such a positive, person in the world and technology for the company, all of that. And I think, the culture to me is both top down and bottom up, and hopefully they meet in the middle, so having your leaders talk about the importance of culture and work-life balance and all of those things. I mean, Microsoft's put a ton of time, energy, and money into something that's called the Work Trends Index, and it is literally a study and research done on humans and humans at work. And it's Microsoft is its own sort of lab, if you will, like one of the biggest laboratories if we want to look at ourselves, in the world. And so Work Trends Index comes from Microsoft itself, but also comes at like the where data is actually shared from customers, partners, and all of that stuff. So there's lots of research that talks about, and it's at Microsoft we have a URL shortener. It's aka.ms/ and it's WTI. So Work Trends Index. And so I tell people to go there a lot because it's when you're trying to potentially maybe make some change or do something differently, you need data, right? You can't just be like, oh, I want to do this. I mean, that's great. But most of the time they're like, okay, tell me why, what's the value, what's the impact, all that kind of stuff. So, using, something like that from Microsoft, you can see, percentages of, if their folks' sense of belonging is up, then you have a higher productivity at work, like all that sort of really great stuff. So yeah, I do feel like, the tech industry has changed over many years. I do a lot of work still talking and hosting panels and lunches for women and allies in technology, diversity and inclusion. I think that there's been a lot of progress made. I still think there's a lot of bad behavior in the world that needs to be worked out. And the only way we do that is by talking about it and having conversations with each other and sharing our stories. I just posted this week about that, about, how to handle, working with difficult employees or difficult, team members. And, people are like, oh, we don't want to talk about that. Right. But the only way to combat really anything is to bring it up and talk about it. And it's sort of the way you bring things up, I think, is how you do it. But yeah, I'm very happy with how Microsoft addresses these issues for sure. So yeah.
Heather, so I have the feeling that the role of leaders in an organization is quite critical in order to create this a given culture, let's say, healthy,
Sure.
unhealthy, with care. So a given
Yeah.
culture. Specifically, how can leaders can create these opportunities for employees to connect, collaborate, and build relationships regardless of physical location? That's part one of my question. Part
Sure.
two, and because I'm curious,
Yeah.
how do the leaders at Microsoft get trained to have that culture?
Oh, sure, sure. Yeah. So a couple of things. I'll answer your second question first, is that, there's extensive training for managers. When you become a manager, you become part of a manager group, you become a part of manager training. It's mandatory. It's not an option. You have to take it. And so every person who is a manager at Microsoft takes the same training, which I think is really important, because then you're coming from the same page, and it's really, I really like a lot of the concepts. I've been both an independent contributor, an IC, and a manager at Microsoft both. So I've been on all of those sides. Um, I think that, a lot of it just has to do with really looking at tried and true, process and procedure to help people really do a good job with that. So definitely, mandatory manager training. I think there's some that's better than others. I think that, expanding training all the time is really important, because you've got different and new issues coming up that folks need to deal with. There's a lot of role playing as well, of thinking about situations. So situational training, which I think is really important, because you can read all the theory you want, but then you're in the middle of it and something happens, somebody comes to you and there's something going on. Sometimes there's no training, for that. But I really like, and this is out in the world, it's model, coach, care. Those are the three main pillars of management at Microsoft. And it's like modeling the behavior, that you're asking for others, coaching people, making sure you're listening and helping people, either find the training they need, or, the different ways that they learn, figuring that out, having those discussions, like what kind of learner are you, and addressing that with somebody. And then care, just, actually having empathy and caring about somebody and caring about their career. We're all here. Yes, we have families, people want to pay for college, people want to make a better life for themselves, all of that, right? So no matter what you do. So I really like that philosophy and training for sure. And I think, it's one of the other things I really love is they started doing this a while back, and it's called team agreements. And basically it's getting your team together and actually talking through. It seems very simple, but it's and small things, but again, small things matter, right? It's how do we talk to each other? Is that, on a Teams chat? Is it email? Is it, how do we, go about our day-to-day business of being together? Who's in a different time zone? Are we actually scheduling meetings in somebody else's time zone all the time, so that they always have a meeting during dinner with their children? That's not cool. Or whatever, whatever it is that you're doing. And so those team agreements, I think, are really important. And that's something that I've talked to a lot of people about have those conversations, so that you can really put them in a framework and say, we handshake, we agree as a team that we're going to try to keep this grid. We're going to try to, this is how we talk to each other. This is where we put stuff. This is how we schedule meetings. Oh, you know what? We're going to do meetings 10 past every time, so that we have a passing period between meetings, because we know, a lot of times you want to get water, you want to go to the bathroom, you need to go do something or whatever. We record every meeting. We do use Copilot. We do this, we do it. So I think there's best practices and tips and tricks that have come out of the things I've learned in, being trained through Microsoft as a manager, and also as a IC as well. So yeah.
I love this idea of team agreement, especially because it's participative. So that means that I I have a saying even about how we should be working together. And that is quite powerful, because
Oh yeah.
triggers the intrinsic motivation. I want to be in a place where I can decide how. It's not imposed. It's not a rule. It is an agreement and an
Right.
intention that we
Yeah.
have together to achieve something together.
Yeah. Completely. Yeah.
Tell me, do you have like because in other tech companies, I remember that I have read one of the books from that tech company,
Uh-huh.
mindfulness. Do you do something in order to groom to help leaders to have more self-awareness, more emotional intelligence, using alternative theories that 10 years ago were not applied?
Yeah, I talk about all of that stuff a lot. So for me, it's not as like what some people are like, oh, that's so woo woo or whatever, whatever they call it, right? You're like, yeah, I do. I mean, I think a couple of things. We have, at Microsoft, there's definitely a whole wellness, be well benefit that there's some funding that comes that you can use for different things, like a exercise or getting an exercise machine or training or whatever. There's also different organizations that we've worked with, like with Headspace or others, that meditation. I'm a big believer in meditation, and I love the listening to different megahertz sound as well, that's supposed to be healing for you. And so I think there's a lot of that comes through from Microsoft itself, but then also as a leader, I think bringing those things into your team can be really powerful. And there's employee resource groups, ERGs, that you can dip into. There's a mindfulness one, and there's other things that you as an employee can definitely dip into. I do appreciate managers that take a minute, and I try hard to do this. I will say I don't do it every time, because I get busy and we got to rock something out or whatever as well. But I do really like sometimes when a manager or whoever's leading a meeting will be like, okay, everybody, take a breath for a second before we jump in here.
Nice.
And I always appreciate that. Some people, I think, you get the eye rollers, they're like, oh, but I do think that, interestingly enough, sometimes they do appreciate it too, so I feel like, again, this is about individual preference, but I feel like we as leaders, we as meeting leaders, will you choose how to set your meeting up? I think it's really important, especially because we're remote, especially because we're using all of these tools and setting, just like the team agreements, it's sort of setting up ground rules for a meeting, like, hey, everybody, let's just take a second and take a breath. Everybody's been running around. You don't have to like sit here and roll your shoulders with me or whatever, but maybe just take a breath for a second. And as we're doing that, I'm going to go over the ground rules for the meeting. We know we're all remote. Use the raise your hand function. If you want to come off mute and say something, that's great. Let's raise your hand, put stuff in the chat. We know we might, step over each other because we're on video and all of those sorts of things. But, all questions are welcome. Let's be mindful of each other, giving each other a chance to talk, blah, blah, blah. Like, you can do that kind of thing. And that usually eases people into a meeting, and or at least lets them know, oh, okay, well, I'm allowed to have a discussion here. I'm allowed to share how I want to. I don't have to turn my camera on. I can put things in the chat, or, so I think those are important things too, that go back to that belonging and community in a way, because the ground rules, so yeah, I try and do that. I don't do it every time, but I try, for sure.
That's awesome. By the way, so let's park a little bit the story of Microsoft and let's talk
Sure.
about others.
Yeah.
So do you have the feeling that companies are really aware about how to use their existing tech to facilitate a sense of community? Are they using it correctly, or they're just buying a product that is made just to send messages?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of different slices of that, for sure. I mean, I think there's building community internally, with your employees and all of that. And then there's building external communities with your customers and partners, right? Which can be the similar thing, but sometimes it's different. So it sort of depends on what your goals and all of that are. But I will say, for the internal, I think that one, people, people buy things a lot of the times and they don't even know what they have. They don't know their stack or what the capabilities are. A lot of people just scratch the surface of just using, basic productivity tools, like Outlook and, Excel, Word, all of that, right? So they don't even realize that there's a whole other world of items that they can use. And they'll maybe go off and buy sort of a one-off thing, or they'll make a decision to be like, okay, now we're going to do all this stuff. We're going to build a community on Discord or whatever, that thing is, and, or, they do it that way. So I do think that the prevalence of a community, like say software or how to get together is a newer concept, I think. But I think for me, like I will say that, SharePoint, which is where I grew up with the Microsoft stack, like that's always been the place for an internal, an intranet, for people to come together in one place that has news and all of that. So that was like, I guess the OG of that kind of thing in my life, for sure. And then with Teams, being built there on top of it, so people being able to chat and collaborate and all of that stuff. I'm obviously Microsoft centric, but I know all the other stacks too. I've worked on, with shops that have just been, very Google centric or other things, and so there are productivity tools and collaboration tools that people can take advantage of. I do think sometimes they just don't know how. I went into a job one time, where I was working for a company, and I was, shocked at their intranet, like how awful it was. And and I was just like, wow, like, how do you, they're like, oh, we just, we don't have time. We post a little here and there. And so I think, but the thing is, though, it doesn't have to be this, this giant extravaganza. I think you can pick one place for them, to start and be consistent. I think with anything, it's consistency, and like that, like a count on it, like I was talking about earlier, that's super important. Maybe it's one newsletter once a month, or maybe it's one meeting, once a month that you start, and then you have a place behind it to have conversations underneath it. I think taking advantage of the stack that you have is super important. And so some discovery, maybe with somebody who's excited about that, could really open that up for a company for sure.
I have a very biased opinion because I'm
Sure.
always critical of a lot of people.
Yeah.
That the problem sometimes comes by the fact that two departments get together, purchasing department together with the IT department, in order to decide we need a communication tool. But they
Right.
don't, maybe it's not enough that these two departments that are very functional decide on something that is very human, that is communication.
Right.
It's not about the flow of information, is about creating this empathy. So the decision should be taken not only by these two departments based on price and functionality, but on more on that. And sometimes people from human resources should be involved on that
Right.
process in order to
Yeah.
decide for a tool that creates this sense of, or in fact, that helps in order to create a culture of the organization, because that tool is going to shape somehow the culture of the company.
Right. Yeah. No, I think to me this is all about adoption and user enablement. And I used to, it's interesting, before I worked back at Microsoft, and I was a Microsoft MVP, and I had clients, and I was doing a lot of technical marketing and all of that. One of the things I was doing, and I was doing this up until 2020, is that I was going around the world and I was teaching workshops about user enablement and adoption of software. And it was about, SharePoint at that time, and just starting to do Teams and other things. And the thing is when you're working on, choosing software, and then you choose it and then you're bringing it into the company, people try to boil the ocean, and you can't do that. And so there's literally tried and true methodology. And it's similar with everything that's going on with AI right now, and or Copilot if you're using Microsoft. So like the thing is to get anybody to adopt anything, there's pretty much a checklist that you put together as a company. And like you were saying, there should be a team that's put together at a company, and there should be somebody from IT. There should be somebody from human resources. There should be somebody from finance. There should be somebody from sales, bringing together that tiger team, if you will, to be that team that's going to really roll out and help with change management and adoption and user enablement inside a company. It's called the law, what is it? The law of diffusion, I think. And it's basically, you go, and when you have your early adopters, then you have your next set, then the middle is where the bell curve goes up, and that's where most people adopt. And then you have your naysayers, and then you have your, that's terrible, we'll never use it, right? You also need to get somebody from each of those areas that work at your company in there. You want the person who is like, this is horrible, we're never going to do this, blah, 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 because they will become your best champion at some point, most likely. But I think, you have to have executive buy-in. You have to know why you're doing it. You have to pick some use cases, and you have to start with one division or one or two use cases for it. You don't roll the whole darn thing out to everybody and their mom. You have to really start with maybe one division or one section of the business to get them using it. And then using, best practices or some trickery, if you will, like with that company I was telling you about, that they weren't really using their intranet. I said, hey, you know what? I said, here's one thing that we're going to do. I was working in marketing at the time, was in the leadership team. And I said, you know what? The letter from the CEO that gets sent out every 2 weeks, you know what we're going to do? We're going to send that out via email, just a paragraph. The rest of it, you have to click and you have to go back to the intranet to read the whole darn thing. Sometimes you have to do that sort of thing to and it's a little bit of trickery, I know, but not really in a way, because you want people to be participating. So to me, it's getting all of those folks together, making a, end user adoption plan. And frankly, adoption.microsoft.com is where I used to go when I did not work at Microsoft, and I would go get all of that material and I would rebrand it and I would make it my own and I would give it in workshops. And that's what it's there for. It's not just for a vendor or a, consultant like me. It is for that tiger team to go and take that information and make it your own for your company and roll things out. So there's tons and tons of resources for that very thing that you're talking about, that if you're not using them, and creating stuff yourself, don't recreate the wheel. Never. It's out there.
I'm totally with you. And you made me think about certain adoption practices that was in a while in my corporate life I saw, that where adoption was just sending the manual, like pages and pages to read.
Oh gosh.
What the hell?
Right. Yeah, no, yeah. You're like, here's a PDF. And I'm like, that's not what? No, yeah. No. Yeah, that's not an adoption plan for sure.
That was horrible. Anyways, so is there a moment where technology can become a barrier to human connection? Have you seen it with your own eyes, when suddenly the CEO wakes up and he feels like, let's use tech for that? Or in some countries where you have the famous bot that you call to the customer service, and you have this famous AI bot who is going to don't understand your accent, my beautiful Spanish accent, by the way,
exactly. Yes.
and or is going to don't understand what I mean and wait for 20 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, I think both of those examples are on point for sure. I think that, I mean, we have been, and we're entering more and more of an AI phase, right? Where there will be more AI generated content and bots and agents and all of those things, and some of those things are definitely a turnoff. People don't necessarily, they want to talk to a human, especially with service calls or support calls, because usually in that moment you're frustrated. Something has gone awry and you're not in a good space, and so having to go through, levels and levels. I do think that those items are going to get better. They're going to be faster. And we might get to a point sooner rather than later where we're okay with that, because it is going to save some time and possibly just get us what we need quicker, and we won't actually maybe, need to go all the way through it. I don't know. We'll have to see on that. I do think that, yes, I think there's definitely examples of where technology gets in the way, or people use technology to gatekeep or ghost people, or kind of gaslight, the three G's that I don't like. And so I feel like you can hide behind technology too sometimes when maybe, you're late on something, or you're not doing things on time. You can blame technology, or, say that, I couldn't do it because the technology isn't able to do that, or supporting it maybe when it does, or so I do think that there's, but that's a fairly, I think, low percentage of people, at least I hope. But I definitely have seen that sometimes, where people aren't willing to do their work, or do their work on time, and they use technology as an excuse. So yeah.
So despite that, of course, I mentioned all this case about the bot that nobody that doesn't understand what I mean. I was impressed, like especially 5 months ago. I remember that I had a discussion with one of my coworkers. He's 22, 23 years old, and he used a sentence that it was quite striking. He said, ChatGPT is my best friend. I am telling him everything. And he had already customized, in fact, his personal branding, his tone of voice, because he works a lot of on social media. And he was using it as to bounce a couple of ideas. Like I would have a chat with you, and it was becoming better and better to understand him, to understand the context of what he wants to do in a simple way. So technology is not like, it's not there. It's just people that are not using the right technology. So using the bot still today is a sin, really, because you have better options today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, ChatGPT is super powerful. Let's see, I think 5 months or so before Microsoft announced Copilot and the whole OpenAI, relationship, I was at a college here locally at El Camino Community College, which is a little bit south of me, and they'd asked me to come do a keynote for, they do a digital transformation talk every year, and they invite community members and all of the kids in their programs and stuff. And so I was talking about all kinds of things, but I had mentioned ChatGPT, and I was explaining it and talking through it. And I have to say that, like, even that, when I was speaking about it, and none of them had heard of it, and talking about natural language and being able to, write code and to all of this stuff, I didn't really understand the power of what I was truly talking about, because the first time I brought ChatGPT up and I asked it to, I don't know, I said, write me a social media plan for a manufacturing company or something like that. And it went, and I was like, oh my, what? Wow. Wow. And yeah, it's a game changer in so many ways. I mean, it's game changer isn't even kind of the right word to the enormity of it. But yeah, I mean, I use ChatGPT, I use Copilot, obviously with Microsoft. But I use it a lot, and it makes me faster. It makes me more productive, because I do a lot of writing, I do a lot of strategy work, I do a lot of putting content out into the world. And so research, it's amazing for research. A friend of mine's going to Iceland. They're going, and they were like doing all of this painstaking research on the itinerary and all of that stuff. And I said, can I show you something? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, create a 2-week itinerary for Iceland for 2 people who like these kinds of things and this kind of food and da 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 da. And it like spit it out in like literally 25 seconds. And my friend literally spit. Like, he totally was just like, it's magic. And I was like, yeah, it's pretty powerful. So yeah.
It is. It's just that sometimes we don't think about asking ChatGPT or Copilot the right question. We forget about it, and we start looking like idiots.
Yeah. I think just like we all had to learn how to use a search engine, just as an example, right? Like we didn't, and there was no real instructions for that. We didn't even get a PDF, on that one. It's just sort of like you learned how to, ask, the search engines the right questions and to get at the right information, right? And I think that's the same learning that's happening in writing prompts, and becoming more and more adept at that, and that comes pretty quickly, I think, with AI, because we're used to doing that with the search engine, and now we're doing it in our AI tools as well. So yeah.
Heather, we are arriving to the end of our discussion, but before the end, you need to
Yeah.
explain to all of us what is an MVP in Microsoft. What
Oh,
does
sure.
an MVP does?
Yeah. So a Microsoft MVP, and it stands for Most Valuable Professional. So there's humans in the world that love technology, and they also love sharing about technology. So they write about it, blog, create videos. They're also people, organizers, people who organize user groups or organize, free events and hackathons and all those sorts of things. So Microsoft created the MVP program a long time ago. It's been around, gosh, a couple of decades, and it was to, highlight and celebrate these folks out in the world. So they're non-Microsoft employees. You can't be an employee and be an MVP, but it's something where either another MVP or a Microsoft full-time employee nominates you. So you get nominated, and then once you're nominated, you add in your contributions to community. So truly, it's about celebrating someone's technical knowledge and their contributions to community. And so basically, people write in, all of the contributions, why they would want to be a Microsoft MVP. And then they are reviewed monthly, and new MVPs are added every month. Then there's also a really large renewal period that happens. It's actually happening right now. Renewals will happen in July, and and so it's super fun. The MVP program itself is run really wonderfully. There's a summit every year where MVPs get together in Redmond and Seattle, Washington. And the other thing about the MVP program, it's celebrating them, and it's also about listening, because products are only as good as the feedback that we're getting and that we're putting into them from a human level. And so MVPs also get early access to Microsoft technology. So they're invited to private previews of the technology where you can go in and test it and give feedback and log bugs and all that kind of thing. They're invited to meetings where the new features are talked about and told to them, so that we get their opinions, because they're usually either consultants or working in other businesses or own their own businesses. So they're working with customers and partners all the time, right? So they're in the trenches, real world, seeing what's going on. So they can come in and be like, could we please just fix this one thing? Or, oh, that new feature, that's kind of weird. Like, why would we do it like that? So you're getting that feedback, and that feedback goes directly into the product teams and engineering, so that so that we're listening, so that there is an actual feedback loop from, these professional folks who are really in there learning and sharing and all of that. So I was in that for a couple of years. Loved it. It also, there's some perks, there's some benefits to being an MVP, that you get certain software a little bit early, and also, other event producers and organizers will often have sessions at their events, specifically for MVPs and stuff. So it's a great program, and it really, they are just one of the the heartbeats of what's going on. We call it the best community in tech. Everybody, MVPs, the customers, the partners, and all of that. And it's really, I've had 20 years of it, and it's an amazing community of people.
That's good. So it's almost like a self-expression platform for fans/enthusiasts of technology. And that's amazing. Heather, so if people want to reach out to you. Sorry, I'm always mixing my
Real
English.
good.
How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I do a lot on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter. It's called Maven Musings that folks can subscribe to. So I'm on LinkedIn for sure. My name is Heather Cook. It was Heather Newman. I changed it back after a divorce. And so people see me out in the world in both ways, but Heather Cook is my formal name now. And then I'm up on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok and all that as Hedda, Hedda Maven, Hedda Maven. I had a director in college for theater, and he called me Hedda. He was from Czechoslovakia, so he would say, Hedda, do it like this, and everybody, so all my friends, that became my nickname. So Hedda, Hedda, and then Maven, Maven, self-proclaimed expert on many things. So there you go.
So I'm I'm going to be putting all these links for LinkedIn newsletter, Insta, Twitter under this episode.
Awesome.
And it was lovely to spend time with you, really.
Yes,
Thank you very much for making it.
Thank you so much. And thank you for what you're doing in the world. It's super awesome. So I appreciate you, and thank you for having me on today.
Thanks. Have a great day, Heather.
All right, you too. Thanks, everybody.